So a very warm welcome to all of you this evening in the IWM Library. This is the evening before the May Day holiday. A lot of people will be singing the famous proletarian song, the International. And that's, I guess, why a lot of people have already left Vienna at this moment. But it gives me particular pleasure and honor to host our guest from China, Yan Xuetong, a professor at Tsinghua University. Yan is one of the major Chinese figures in the study of IR, international relations. He is the founder of a school of thought in IR, moral realism, a neoclassical realist theoretical paradigm. His moral realist theory is based on political determinism. In 2008, Professor Xuetong, he was named one of the world's top 100 global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine. He is the only political scientist listed as most cited Chinese researchers by Elsevier during the period 2014-17. He holds a BA in English from Heilongjiang University and did his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley. He has a distinguished career, more than 2 decades at the Chinese Institute of Contemporary International Relations. He worked for several years at Tsinghua University, including as the dean of its Institute for International Relations. As of at least 2024, Professor Xuetong is the Secretary General of the World Peace Forum, which is one of China's most important international relations conferences. His analyses draw on realist ideas from the Western context and re-examines them in the context of historical Chinese theory. His views are associated thus with the Chinese School of International Relations. Please join me in welcoming Professor Xuetong here.
Thank you.
And with us is also Niccolò Milanese, who is associated with the IWM through the Europe's Futures Fellowship. He was a fellow on the program back in 2019-20, but more importantly, Niccolò Milanese heads an NGO, a European NGO called European Alternatives, that is looking at issues of democracy, revitalizing, reinventing, deepening civic participation and democratic decision-making. And he is also related with the Berggruen Foundation, thanks to which Professor Xuetong is here. The Berggruen Institute and Foundation, and maybe Niccolò can say a few words, is based in Los Angeles, but has two prominent offices, one closer to Vienna in Venice, but also a Chinese Berggruen Center. And we will have a conversation after the initial introduction that Professor Xuetong will give us. So the floor is yours, Professor.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much for the nice introduction, and also I highly appreciate for your institution organize this very, very valuable opportunity for me to discuss the international relations with your distinguished guests. Well, I think nowadays, and more people are concerned about change in global order. And after President Trump and take over power in the US, and it seemed to me, and the people worried more than before, rather than relaxed. And this is actually related to my theory. For IR theories, we always want to find one theory to explain everything. So we call it the universal theory or strong theory. So for a long time, and we have three main IR theories explain the stability and the change, and both stability and change of international orders. And like constructivism strongly emphasize the international norm. They explain why the world becomes less and less violent and more peaceful. So because the human being developed better norms than before. For liberalism, who once are very dominating after the Cold War, and suggest that because the U.S. established the institutions and the democratic institutions or the sovereignty institutions after World War II, so it make the world getting more and more peaceful or less and less than wars. And certainly the other very classical theory is realism. Realism tries to explain it, everything from the perspective of the national interest and the power, right? Well, actually, from my understanding, now we find that none of these theories or the paradigms can explain why US policymakers, I mean the Biden and Trump, they adopted so opposite policies without the change of international norm, without the change in power structures, without change in institutions. Why institutions, norms, and the power structures cannot make these two leaders adopt the same policy for the same interests of the United States, for the maintaining same power of U.S. I think both Biden and Trump want to maintain America's domination in the world. They want to, at least all of them rhetorically said, they try to adopt a policy to serve American interests, right? But then they have the same goal, same interests, but why they adopted totally opposite approaches to achieve this? From my understanding, there are different types of leadership. So for my theory, moral realism, just now you may heard the term. Moral realism regard that we cannot explain the changes in international relations by norms, institutions, and power structure. Because in a given period, these three elements are constant. They can explain the continuity. Constant can never explain change. You need the variables. So what changed when these three elements maintain the same? The change in global leadership. After the Cold War, and the US obtained the global leadership, and mainly because the collapse of the Soviet Union. But then, in the last 20 more some years, and US adopt a policy maybe a little bit different, I mean by the different policymakers, but there are no difference in dimension. The dimension the same, and there's a difference in degree. But now we find that Trump's policy is not only different from Biden's policy in degree, but in nature or in character. So all of the theories cannot explain. Why? So for moral realism, my theory categorizes the leadership into four types: the human authority, and mainly represented by the JFK. Roswell and the president served during the World War II, and then the hegemony, the hegemonic leadership. And for me, I think it's represented by Junior Bush. Is eager to have a preference to settle down disputes through war. And then we have these leaders of what tyranny. And certainly the typical case is Hitler and some leaders like that. And then we have a very unique case, is Trump. Trump is different from none of the three. He's not a human authority leadership, not hegemonic leadership. It's not totalitarian leadership. And I use the term animocracy. Animocracy means that he do something and concern more about personal interests rather than American national interests. And for a type of leadership, and they need for all the policymakers, and they have to maintain, they have to deal with the relationship between the personal interests and national interests. I'm talking about national policymakers. And some of them, and give the first priority to national interests, make the personal interests subordinate to their national interests. Some maintain the balance between the two. But then there's a third type of leaders. They regarded their personal interests as above national interests. Maybe some people think this is rare, this is unique. From my understanding, it's not rare, it's not unique. If you look at the history, you will find that most of the empires, the same type. Most of the empires, kings, knights, monarchy, they usually regarded their personal interests as more important than the interests of their people. Why? From my standpoint, because they believe, at least, they think the country is owned by himself. He had the power not only control the country owned by them. So I think when we have that kind of a leader, and then you will imagine in this modern time, and when they give the first priority to their personal interests rather than the national interests, so they may adopt some policy very different from what we imagine he or she should do. So nowadays, from my understanding, the world really faces a very, very difficult period, because we don't have any country willing to provide or able to provide a global leadership. It's very possible in the next 10 years, we will have a global order without leadership. There's a kind of an order without leadership. For instance, we find in the sea, there are some fish, no leaders, but then, right? They follow each other, yeah, like that. They imitate each other, then there's order. So if you go to Germany, you find people follow the traffic lights very rigorously. But if you go to Thailand, well, no one cares about the traffic lights. But then they still can maintain the order, there are no accidents, right? I remember that in Tsinghua, we don't have stop sign on the street. And so once I talked with the person who is in charge of the traffic on the campus, I said, hey, there's no stop sign, it's very dangerous. He said, oh, Professor Yan, you're really right. But he said, ironic. For last half century, without a stop sign, we don't have any accident on the campus. So you see, human beings can create orders without leadership. So nowadays, from my understanding, and the type of leadership actually closely related to two things with international order. First, we have order or not. That means we have peace or war. Now we see, and there's some region has wars, some region don't have wars. And unfortunately, and I don't know whether any of you have to think about that, why there's any war in Europe during the Cold War. But after 1991, the war never stopped. one after another in this continent. Coincidentally, it's totally opposite. During the Cold War, the war never stopped in East Asia. From Korean War, Vietnam War, Cambodian War, and one after the military clashes between China and the Soviet Union never stopped. After 1991, it's almost 30 years, there's no war in that region. So my understanding, the leadership really has a very, very important role in maintaining peace and for bring about wars. That's one thing related, the correlation between leadership and peace. Second is when we have the order, there could be different type of orders. That's from my understanding, and really decided by the type of leaders. And we can have different type of leaders. They all prefer peace, but then they prefer different pieces, not the same piece. You can have equal peace, hierarchical peace, and you can have peace as a university, and also you can have peace in prison. So the peace, the international order, can be in different types or features. Okay, I think I have talked too many. I want to have discussion. And I just want to say, nowadays is a time for IR scholars to study two things. First, and what's the relationship between leadership and security? I mean, peace and the war. And also, what's the kind of leadership? They will create a better institution for maintaining peace. And I have debate with most of the liberalism. Liberalism strongly emphasizes the role of the institution. And they believe if you have a good institution, it will automatically maintain the peace. But actually, from my understanding, it's not true. The international institution didn't change during the transfer between the Biden to the Trump. Why the institution no longer works like before? And actually, whether the institution functions or not, decided by leadership. Leader can create orders and adjust orders, they can establish institutions, adjust institutions, and undermine institutions, and destroy institutions, undermines institutions. So that really depends how much the leadership prefer the institution to work or not. And the second thing I think is more important. This is quite theoretical. Now, because of the peace, after the actually after 1970s, and there's becomes a real détente between Soviet Union and the U.S. And then people start, all of the mainly study the international relations with elements at the system level, and ignore human being. Means that ignore the role of the leadership. You find that nowadays more and more IR journals and the user title, leadership matters, right? Now people say, hey, wait a minute, seems to me the leadership is more important than anything else. So nowadays, I think that we really, for IR scholars or the policy analysis, should and give attention to the role of leadership, try to understand the world, and analyze the real situation, reality, from the perspective of leadership. And also related to this, it's about morality. And people label my theory as a moral realism, actually because I use morality as what the values, different values of the leadership. Leadership is an independent variable in my theory. But then this leadership can be different types. How can you categorize the types of leadership? So I use the morality as the values for different types of leadership. So in what way I believe, and leadership has a different preference. First, to their personal interests and or relationship with the national interests. And second, even they subordinate their personal interests to the national interests, they will have different preferences for the sequence of the priorities of national interests. Economic interests should above the security, or security should at the first priority. Now we find that more and more leaders start talking about economic security. Less and less leaders talking about economic development. Let's think about that. 10 years ago, most leaders talking about what? Economic development. Now they're talking more about economic security. So I do not blame anyone. I just said that this situation becomes so obvious after the war occurred in Ukraine 2022. Before that, there's a talking about economic security, just rhetoric, not real, but followed by the concept of economic security related to the war in Ukraine, and then what? Many policymakers adopt decoupling, de-risking, and this kind of deglobalization policy. That's why now we find that the world order is so different from what we had after 1992. And so I think nowadays you also find that there's more articles of IR, and it started talking about morality. What kind of a morality leadership should have? We don't think we can let them have that. But then that is a really thing, that when we select leaders, and what kind of morality we should use for us to judge the leadership. This is very important. Now some people, and so someone said that you cannot blame the leaders because they're elected by yourself. Well, I think I just stop here, and I want to have a discussion with that. Okay.
Thank you very much for that introductory talk. You have opened a myriad of questions. I think we would all agree with you that the world has certainly changed, not only after '89, not only after COVID, not only after the Russian aggression and invasion of Ukraine, but also now with the 47th president in the United States. Lots of food for thought. I'm sure there are varied opinions on all of these subjects that you have discussed. But before I ask you a question, I'd like to invite Niccolò to give his thoughts and say a few words.
Thanks, Ivan, and thanks, Professor Jan Xuetong, for this introduction. Allow me to say a couple of things about the Berggruen Institute to frame what I want to say as the core point of the discussion. The Berggruen Institute, as Ivan mentioned, has a center in LA, where it was in fact established. Then it set up a center in Beijing as well, and over the past year has opened up an institute in Venice, in a beautiful palace in Venice, as it turns out. And the mission of the institute is as simple as trying to invite thinkers, artists, scientists, philosophers to provide an interpretation of a metamorphosizing world, a world that is changing enormously in all kinds of dimensions. But clearly, one important dimension that we're talking about today is international relations. So it's entirely appropriate to be mobilizing international relations theory to try to understand what is happening around us. Another one of the missions of the Berggruen Institute, though, is to see what possible dialogue and even cooperation there is between these three different parts of the world. LA, Europe, as represented by Venice, Beijing. No, well, if you have to be represented by somewhere, it's maybe worth considering. And, you know, we're 100 days into President Trump's presidency, and so much has been said about him already that I think maybe to redress the balance, it's important to think about what Europe and China should be doing in this situation. And, you know, at least some of the European leaders are starting to speak the vocabulary that you refer to. Indeed, Kasia Kallas said Europe now needs to act as a global leader of the liberal order. Von der Leyen a couple of days ago in Die Zeit didn't quite put it in those terms, but still talked about how the West doesn't exist in the same sense that it previously did, and that Europe has a particular kind of role to play. So it feels like a moment where Europe is called upon to act in a kind of leadership role, but perhaps at the moment lacks the capacity or the capability to fully do so. And China also is in a position of significant influence. I don't know whether to call it reluctant leadership or whether it is willed leadership, but it's in a preeminent position. And so it poses the question of what these two blocks or two ends of the same continent ought to be doing together, if anything, in the context of a kind of abdicated US leadership, global leadership, and significant disruption, reorganization. And I think, in addition to this vocabulary of leadership, there is also a vocabulary of morality that is being used, if only to condemn the morality of Trump, but then also to call for something else. And perhaps there is some possibility of at least understanding, or of understanding one speaking roughly the same kind of language around a rules-based order, a way of carrying on in the world which is based on some moral agreements, even if the values may then be a bit different between China and between Europe. So I think it's worth exploring whether there's a possibility of a dialogue there and the basis of a reset or an intervention in the current international disorder. And Jan, I know you've written about the possibilities of going beyond liberalism, also bringing in some Chinese ancient thought. So this is one area to explore at a, so let's say, philosophical level. But then I also think it's worth exploring practical possibilities of political cooperation around things which both parts of the world see as important. An obvious example is fighting climate change. Europe and China are arguably two of the main parts of the world now which still believe that fighting climate change is a planetary imperative, whereas the US is pulling back from that. So what practical possibility of collaboration is there on fighting climate change? I wonder about topics like food security as well, which, as everybody here knows, is a massive global issue. Around financial reform. I mean, if you weren't already convinced that the way our financial markets work is terrible after the financial crash, well, now with Trump's interventions, maybe many of us are even more convinced that something needs to be done to change the way these financial systems work. A third area to consider would be around technology and research. What possibilities of collaboration, if any, could be built practically now? But I think that there may be others as well, but a very immediate challenge that anybody who wanted to set up meaningful and practical European and Chinese collaboration on practical projects would face now would be around the issue of the war in Ukraine and finding some degree of understanding of the different positions in Europe and in China around that war. Now, you've written, Jan, at the end of last year, that the war in Ukraine is of no interest or of no value. It's something damaging to the Chinese economy. It's highly disruptive. At the same time, you'll be aware that there's allegations, at least, of Chinese involvement in arms, in other forms of support to the Russian aggressor. And so I think that if we're able to talk about that here, it would be interesting to hear your analysis of what the Chinese position is on the war in Ukraine, and is there any potential of a Chinese contribution to a peace initiative or some sort of attempt to bring the fighting to an end, and what would that look like? Because as I say, I think that's a precondition as a question for any further sort of diplomatic collaboration these days.
And if I may simply add a footnote, if we're talking about morality of leadership, we've talked about the 47th president, but also we need to talk about the morality of the Russian president, I think. Please, Professor, if you want to answer, give us your reflections on the Russo-Ukrainian war and the possibility of China helping to find a peaceful solution.
Actually, in China, I have a serious debate with Chinese colleagues. And some people believe and the war in Ukraine and cause both problems or the harms to China as create opportunities for China. Well, I argue that I think the war only causes only troubles to China. There's no any opportunities for China. The reason is very clear. And before the war, and the whole world, including France, Germany, UK, Japan, and except the US, and all major powers adopted the hedging strategy. That means economically rely on China, but on the security and cooperate with the US. So this general balance was totally broke by the war in Ukraine. When the war in Ukraine took place, and the EU and immediately said that it is dangerous to have economic relationship with China, just like the economic relationship with Russia. And because the supply chain of energy stopped by the war, so a lot of the European people, especially in Germany, and they can no longer have enough energy to warm their home during the winter. So now they developed strengthened the concept and the economic security. So purposely, and they developed a new strategy, reduce economic interdependence with China, with Russia, and like that. So this really make China cause a big problem with China. Not only Europeans, and also South Korea and Japan, all of them, and doing that. So what happened? And nowadays, especially after President Trump changed the US policy toward the Ukraine, and Europeans and Japanese, South Koreans, they all changed the policy. They said, okay, they want to go back to the hedging strategy. They want to resume the economic cooperation with China. So I think this is really a very serious issue. The damage and caused by the war in Ukraine to China. And so that's why China concerned that if possible, we should stop the war as early as possible. Unfortunately, because of the ideological diversity between China, or differences between China and the Western countries, people do not, the media, international media do not give attention to what China done for preventing, to try to stop the war, or at least preventing the war from escalating into the bigger disaster. So you may remember that. And before Chinese leader visit Moscow, and they're all international media talking a lot about the dangers of a nuclear war. right? Maybe the escalation from the current war in Ukraine to the nuclear war, that's dangerous. But the Chinese leader visited Russia. They published a joint statement, jointly, and the Russian leaders agreed to say that and never allow nuclear war occur. No reason to use nuclear weapons. That's a statement. So after that visit, international media no longer talking about danger of the nuclear war. I think that's what China's contribution. Certainly, and including Ukraine and many other European countries, always talking, hey, China should play more roles in this issue and to stop the war. Well, from my understanding, when they say what China, the more roles China should play, means that China should impose pressure on Russia. It doesn't mean that China, okay, if you can stop the war, no matter what effort you can do. So they think that China should not persuade Europeans and to stop the war. You only should persuade Russia to stop the war. Actually, and if you want to have a peace, you have to make both sides agree with the agenda. You cannot have the peace with a agenda or suggestion only accepted by one side. That's my view. And last thing is about the war. And President Trump said that he can end the war in 24 hours during the campaign. And then he talked to President Zelensky that he can stop the war within 2 weeks in the White House. Now the negotiations started from the February 18th in Saudi Arabia. It's more than 2 months. And we have not seen any substantial progress. From my understanding, that's my view. I think many people, including the policymakers, they do not try to ask the question, how the war occurred in Ukraine. They don't want to do deep study. And if they don't want to understand why, I doubt they can find the right approach to end the war in short term. And so we also heard that, and when the war just occurred, and Russia used the term special military operation. Why they use the term? They concern they can end this military conflicts within 2 days, or at least a week or something like that. So both sides believe the war can be ended in very short term. From my understanding, this kind of thinking is based on wrong understanding about the cause of the war. And if you look at this situation, and the war in Ukraine is not the unique one. As soon as the Cold War ended, and then what? The Azerbaijan and the Armenia and go to war. These two countries went to war 3 times in the last 3 decades. And even military clashes between 2 NATO members, Greece and Turkey in 1992. Certainly, you know all of the things in the Yugoslavia. And then one after another, and Chechnya and Georgia, and one after another. Today, I just visited OSCE, and certainly they do not allow us to get in. We just take photo of that building. Well, actually, if that institution functions, my understanding, it can prevent all of these wars. And why? During the Cold War, both sides, no matter East Europeans or West Europeans, they keep one thing in their mind. And for preventing nuclear war, we should maintain the current border, no matter what happened. Don't change the border. after the Cold War and after the collapse of the Union, NATO gave up this principle, changed the border for the democracy, as many as possible, because we have a superior military force. We can change the border. We can do whatever we want. So if these European policy makers still keep that principle in the mind, actually that's a main principle for OSCE. During Cold War is CSE. And then you can maintain the peace. Look at the situation in Africa. African Union, they established this organization very late in 60s, 70s of the last century. Then what? They know none of the borders for African states are reasonable. It's out by the colonial powers just on the map. But then they know if they do not change the border, they can avoid a lot of killings and wars. So you see what happened. There's still wars in Africa, but less and less. It's opposite. The trend is different from this region. This region, the trend of the war is getting more and more frequent. But in Africa, there are a lot of war, but then most of them are civil war. And this war do not spill beyond the border. This war do not cause more wars for the disputed borders. So that's my understanding. The leadership is really important. Leadership have different preference. So now I think both European leaders and Chinese leaders, American leaders, all these major political entities leaders, they should considering what's the right principle for maintaining world peace.
Yes, if I may comment a few things. I mean, the Helsinki Agreement, of which we are celebrating 50 years and which has disappeared now, of course, with everything that's happened, is what held the power structure together. But if I may add to what you said, I mean, after the fall of communism, and we must remember that the Soviet Union invaded two European countries, Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. And I served my military service in Yugoslavia in 1972, and we were under the threat of Soviet invasion. And when I came to the Yugoslav People's Army with the Red Star, they told us we're here to defend ourselves against the Soviet attack. And so these countries wanted to preserve their freedom or to conquer their freedom. So I think we must factor that in as well. There's something called the people who want freedom. And given the European context of democratic revolutions, the French Revolution, the Dutch Revolution, the British Revolution, this is part of the European DNA, which is certainly different from the American, from the Asian. And that is why when countries were liberated from communism in 1989, they wanted to join someone who would protect them from a possible threat. And unfortunately, that threat materialized in the invasion by Russia of a sovereign European country called Ukraine, and the special military operation, the goal was to conquer all of Ukraine. Fortunately, the Ukrainians were courageous enough to avoid that full conquering of their state and subjugation to the Russian power, and they're still doing that. So they are defending their sovereign freedom, and in a sense, it's different from what happened in my country or the other examples you mentioned, because this is a nuclear world power attacking the one. So those are just my comments. But if you agree, I'd like to open it up to our audience to ask questions, and maybe we can hear some other comments and questions to what you said. Yes, and the microphone is here, and please introduce yourself when you ask your question. Yes, right here.
Michael Landesmann. I'm an economist, so I'm really an amateur in your sphere of international relations. I was just on the first part of your talk. I was just worried when you spoke about leadership being an independent variable, meaning as if it comes somehow from nowhere. It's directly linked with the personality of the person. But as far as I could see, and you were saying, oh, we can't explain it by other frameworks because there was the national interest of America was more or less defined both under Biden and Trump, yeah? In the same way, in a sense, and the institutions were the same. And basically what changed was the person who came to power. But then one has to ask what drives what you called personal interest, yeah? One might have a trivial answer, it's purely real estate interest. But I doubt that this is really what drives the Trumpian agenda. There are differentiated power bases. I'm sorry, I'm not a political scientist, but I would have thought that different leaders come to power with different power bases and different political processes behind them. And obviously in the Trump case, it was a populist movement, yeah, which was generated over quite some time. And we see similar changes in European countries when leaders come to power having a different position on many questions. Yeah, they're based on different political processes and power bases in their own countries. So I was just worried about this statement you made. We have to define the leadership as an independent variable, as if there is no further analysis behind it. Yeah.
Okay,
Please.
okay. Well, I think that's a very good question, and that means we need to identify the differences between the other Americans' personal interests and the Trump's personal interests, because his behavior is so different, not only different from Biden, but from most of the American policymakers. First, I think I would want to say that say my disagreement with the analysis why Trump is different from them. There's a popular view, I don't know whether in Europe or in the other countries, but in China, they believe Trump was a businessman. So businessmen behave different from politicians. And his personal interest is money. Okay, actually, I think this is wrong. And not only he's a businessman, and Hoover is a businessman. And Carter is a businessman, and Bush, the father and son, they're businessmen, and Harding, businessman. So there's 6, including the Trump. There's 6 American president with background as a businessman. So businessmen do not behave the same. So if I give my answer to what difference from the Trump's personal interest from the other U.S. president's personal interest. He wants to be the greatest American president. None of any American president have said, I want to be the greatest American president, including Washington, including Lincoln, including the DFR. But these 3 are really regarded as great American president by people, but not by themselves. This is different. Trump regarded himself will be, and already be, the greatest American president. Is what he said. 2 weeks, I have make the more achievement than the most presidents achieved in their 2 terms. That's what he said. It's not what I said. He wants to be the greatest American president. That's said by himself. And in one interview, when people asked him about DFR, Roswell, he even said that he has done better than the Roswell. So I think this is very, very unique. When he regarded being the greatest American president as his personal interest, it's a fundamental goal to achieve. And I think both him and the other people will ask the same question. What he did or achieved can make his name as a great president in American history. Not the ordinary things, not the normal American interests, not the economic growth, not the military influence, not that. He wants something much bigger. That's why when he's talking about take over Canada, take over Greenland, a lot of people said, hey, that's a joke. Actually, what's the previous Canadian Prime Minister, Trudeau, said? He said, according to his conversation with Trump, he said, he is serious. Right?
Comment? Yes, please, in the back, right at the back. Sophia, thank you.
So hi, I'm Družić. Nice being here. Thank you for the lecture. First, I cannot not to refer to your idea that Mr. Trump wants to be the greatest US president, because it seems that he's really going into a completely different direction. But okay, let's see where it all ends up. I mean, let's give it a try. I would like to ask both panelists maybe to refer to one paradigm that I realized when you read one sources and the other, the paradigms about the world order. On one side, we have the Western paradigm that the world order was completely disrupted with Russian invasion of Ukraine. On the other side, when you see in China, in Russia as well, but in China, there is a paradigm that it was disrupted already in Yugoslavian case, Kosovo war, that you had the bombing of Chinese embassy, then Iraq war 2003. So how to bring closer these paradigms? What is the end effect? Did we completely disrupt the world order? Can we repair it? What should we do in order to repair it? Because it's obvious that it's somehow damaged. Thanks.
Okay. And I think this is a very academic question. That means which events marked the change of global order? I know in Europe, many people regard war in Ukraine and it's the event which changed the world order. My question is that why the war in the Kosovo do not regard it as the turning point for changing the water? My understanding, because many Europeans want to have that kind of war, want to have that kind of change. They want to have a war against those people that's a government they don't like. So that's why when they see the war in Middle East, the war, when Junior Bush launched the war in Iraq, and no one thinks he's changed the world order. They say, okay, that's good. So the question is that academically, we have to ask what means the change of the global order. Change of the global order can have the understanding two levels. First level, more wars or less wars. Okay, that's the direction. Second is a type of the order. Change from a type A order to type B order, or order A to order B. After the Cold War, and the US established a globalization order. This is widely agreed. People like this kind of change. So the world order actually changed after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But no one complained about it. And Senior Bush, and he announced that we are going to have a new order, right? And so when that time, when the world order changed, people think we are changing the world order in positive, aggressive direction. People say, that's good. We changed the Cold War order to a post-Cold War order, but it is welcomed by the rest of the world. Today, the change of the world order is not moving toward a positive or progressive direction, but make a U-turn toward the negative or step back. Make history make a U-turn. So we don't like it. We concern. This is also kind of a type of order, but then we concern who turned this steer. So just now you suggest some people believe, oh, it's Russia, right? They think Russia and changed the world order. I don't think Russia has that capability. Do Russia have that resources to change the global order? I doubt. Their GDP is so small, right? And smaller than India, smaller than UK, smaller than France. And such a small GDP, how can they change the global order? That's impossible. Well, that's my view. I think now the world order changed the direction from globalization initiated by the United States and to the counter-globalization. That's the different character of the global order. So I regard this order A and the order B, the two types of the orders. Who started this? My understanding, the first guy tried to change this order is UK. The withdrawal from the EU in 2017, right? And they adopted a deglobalization policy. Actually, the UK is also too small, right? And it's one of the P5, but that's only in name, right? They don't have the P5 power. And so UK do something, have the influence only in this region, in Europe, not beyond this region. He cannot change the global order. So the global order actually started to change. By who? By the initiator, United States. US established the order from 1991. I hold a very different view from American liberalists. They think America established the order from the world after World War II. No, Cold War is a totally different order from today. And actually, from 1991, US initiated this global order. And principle of free trade and democratization, marketization, these are a core content of globalization initiated by the US. But then what? Who dislike globalization? Trump, President Trump. That's what he said. And if globalization is in favor of the US, he asked a question. Why China becomes the main or largest beneficiary of the globalization, but not US? Even US is the second benefit of the globalization, and at the second place, he said, it's wrong. Only US benefit more than anyone is the right strategy. So from 2018, and Trump initiated the war, a trade war against China. That's my view. That's a personal view. I think that's a turning point. And because the US has such huge economic power, the war with the second largest economy, when these two guys have trade war, it has global influence, not a regional influence. So that's my view. And who changed today's global order.
Can I just follow up very quickly on that? During the first term of the 45th then president, there was an agreement of sorts that was achieved between China and the US. At a certain level, there was something of a stability achieved. Now, and if you read the Financial Times this morning, Martin Wolf, says the U.S. cannot win. China will win this war very, very clearly. And those of us who are non-economists, in a very lay sense, are watching which happens. What is your prediction as things go forward in this attempt by the United States administration to, how long will this effort last? Because clearly China, which has a 4,000-year civilization, is more resilient and can last longer in this effect and will not clearly step down from competing and countering these efforts by the US? How do you see this evolving in real IR realistic terms?
Okay. Let me clarify one fact. And actually, in the last year of Trump's first term, and Trump 1.0, China-US relationship even worse than today.
During the last year?
The last year of his term, first term, there's no official channels, contact. At least today, we can have Chinese financial minister and talk with the American financial minister, and there's still some contact. And in the latter, there's the official channel, and established nearly over 70s during the Obama's period. Official dialogue, over 70 channels. And at the very last year of the Trump's first term, it goes down to 0, none. Today, at least, we have not the many, but 1 or 2, right? Politically, and at least today, and Trump do not use that nasty language about China like what he did in the last year of his first term. Although his policy is really tough, that's true. But linguistically, and his wording, not that bad. Second, I think Trump's the trade war between China and the US, Trump has no chance to win. And the reason is very simple. And he saw that China need the Chinese US market. That's true. We need US market for what? For money. Right? For money. So I can have more money put in bank or have less money in the bank. So maybe my savings and becomes less. So when we stop the trade between China and the US, what the US will lose? And they lost the daily facilities. They need to use for their daily life. So one side for China, we need is money, is cash. People can survive with the more cash and the less cash, right? But then you cannot survive without the basic facilities. You have to, you need to drink water, you need to eat food, you need to take bus, you need clothes, you need shoes, you need all of these things. So now you find there's a trade relationship between China and US, and many people use a concept talking about the trade relationship. The trade relationship between China and the US is not a shared interest. We do not have shared interest. We want money, they want goods. This is called what? The complementary interest. Just like you go to shop, the shop owners want cash. They don't want to have goods from you. You want goods from it. This is not the same interest. This is not a shared interest. This is a complementary interest. So when China and the trade between China and the US based on the complementary interest, then we have to see which side the interest is not large or small. Which side the interest is related to the basic needs of life.
Niccolò, you wanted?
Yeah, maybe just to say something about the question on global order, because there's no doubt going to be many ways that one could try to define a global order in a more descriptive sense, but what is more interesting to me is the normative principles that underlie it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if one would want to try to identify a principle in what Trump is doing, the only one that comes to mind is around trying to make international relations and market relations a matter of transactionalism. And I think there's a serious question to be asked about whether analysis of the damage that's done to the American economy is really meeting Trump at the level at which he's thinking. Is it some subset of people in the American economy that he's actually working on behalf of? But I'm less interested in speaking about Trump. I'm more interested in speaking perhaps about the normative principles. I think that it's a really good question to ask about the different understandings of the global principles. Because one of the things that was revealed and came as a kind of a shock to Europeans, if you all remember in the early days of the second wave of the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, there was an attempt to have a UN condemnation of this, and Europeans were shocked that many countries, notably in the majority world or in the global south, didn't join in with condemning this. And at the time, the explanation was heard that it was in relation with Europe's lack of solidarity during COVID, these kinds of explanations. But I think maybe there was something more profound there, that Europeans had persuaded themselves that large parts of the world shared normative principles and in fact realized, no, this is not as common sense in the world as we thought it was. Surely European hypocrisy is also a big part of that story, right? That from colonialism to the Iraq War, Europe has been, and the West has been, claiming one set of principles while acting in another sort of way. But it's important to realize, and I wanted to underline that what the principles are and the effects of European hypocrisy has always been contested inside of Europe as well. Think of all the millions of people who were marching against the Iraq War, and even European governments that were protesting against the Iraq War. It's a feature of our democracies that these conversations can happen and protest, and the hypocrisy is pointed out. But it seems to me that there is nonetheless a profound and basic question relating to the global order around our attitudes towards the Russian aggression, and that is, are we happy to live in a world in which big, powerful countries can invade neighboring small countries and claim territory and land or not? And I think it's very difficult to justify universally a global order in which that is an acceptable thing to happen. And so I would hope that across cultures, languages, civilizations, there could still be a basic agreement that aggressive wars for taking of territory are unacceptable and have to be combated, and combated also in the sphere of combat, if that's the only place where it has to be where it can be done. And so it troubles me when the vocabulary of peace starts to sound rather like the vocabulary of capitulation, because it means that principle will be lost.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this argument I think are really very important. And when we're talking about type of order, actually we're talking about the normative feature. That means what a type of normative orders we are going to have. And we have an order based on rules, or we have an order based on deals between leaders. And obviously, and you can find that President Trump used the term, I was going to have a deal with him, deals. So he regarded the world order is based on the deals between personal relationship, not based on rules. So this is a different type of order. And could be, certainly it can create an order based on that. Even mafia can create an order in Chicago, right? So that is what type of order we want. We want to have an order like university, or we want to have an order like the prison. So nowadays, I think it's really time for us talking about what type of order we prefer. Second is that's my view. I think the type of order is closely related to the type of leadership. What kind of leadership, and that means with what type of strategic preference for what kind of orders. Now, I think now populist leaders is gaining momentum. That's my view. I think we're going to have more populist leaders rather than less. So because they hold the power, they will definitely change the norms and the normative type of the global order.
Questions, comments over there and then here, Sofia?
Hello, thank you. Yeah, my name is Pratik. I come to this from more of a sustainability science perspective. And this is what actually, I think the heading or the headline of the talk this evening was about potential collaboration between EU and China, and now that US has so clearly basically left the conversation. I'm sorry, it's kind of difficult to formulate the question, but I feel it's a bit like we, or at least in the international relations field, the norm is that we think of the world in terms of a chessboard, yeah? And I'm afraid the biophysical realities are catching up. And I see sort of a hope in actually from both Europe and China, because I do think there are some signs. So for example, from the Chinese perspective, the conversation about ecological civilization, and EU has been sort of trying to do things with a new Green Deal and all that. And my fear is that all this security talk, all this us versus them narrative, oh, look at them, they don't care about democracy and all that, this is undermining also some potentials of collaborations. And I'm afraid the changes that are coming in the planetary systems are really big. They are huge than all of these squibbles, I'm sorry. So maybe it's also relevant to sort of work that Berggruen Institute is doing. So if I were to formulate a question, maybe what can be done in this situation to, because the world order is changing or is being disrupted, which is also opening up possibilities, open windows. So what can be done? I see like China and EU as two big responsible or sort of responsible blocks. So yeah, I hope there's a question in there.
Yes, please.
Me?
You can respond, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I heard a lot of people talking about the term chessboard, and which is used by the Berggruen, and is very well known, right? And actually, I think this concept only partially explains the international order or international relations. And the important thing is not the chessboard. Important thing is what's the game? It's Go, or it's international chess, or it's poker, or it's Chinese chess. And the important thing is not the chessboard. The important thing is the rules for different games. So for international competition, and we can have a ping pong type of competition. And also we can have a boxing match, right? We can knock each other, kill each other. So that's a really different type. So now from my understanding, when we're talking about normative order, we're talking about what kind of rules we should use to govern the competition or even the confrontation. My understanding for China and the EU, now we have not reached agreement on this. What norms we should use to govern our relationship. This is really a very serious issue. And so you find that currently China and the EU talking about mainly focus on the economic cooperation. The reason is that because both sides agree we should continue the principle of free trade. That means when they reach agreement on this game rules, and then they can discuss how to cooperate. But come to the security issues, China and the EU have not reached a rule or the principle for govern the relation. That's why China and the EU have not talked very much about security cooperation like that. I think just within this year, China and the EU can make a lot of progress in field of the economic cooperation, because they already reached that the rule of the free trade principle.
And the number of visits of European leaders to China over the past 12 months testifies to that direction. There was a question right here.
Pan Mihalevich, historian, Vienna. May I come back to China in a way and to be rather blunt? I thought we had an agreement that there must be rules and wars of aggression are not to be accepted. Does China hold the same view? To be very blunt, why does China support Russia? If Russia is so unimportant, why does it take advantage of the situation? If there are rules and we accept the rules, why is China helping breaking the rules?
Okay.
I didn't get the question very clearly. And can you repeat the question? Why China breaking what rules?
Why? Yeah, we agreed that there must not be a war of aggression like Russia just invading Ukraine in the way it actually does. And I had the feeling, I had the understanding that there was a common understanding that these are against the rules we share. And my very blunt question is, why is China helping breaking the rules? Because it obviously takes advantage of the situation and is supporting Russia.
Okay. And the first, I think China has a very clear stance. And we strongly emphasize that every country, including Russia, should respect territorial sovereignty of every independent state. We never give any support for any country to occupy others' territory. Never. Second, and China never provide any military aid to neither side for the war to escalating the war. And so when you said that in this country, in this region, and many countries share the principle, and I don't think they really share the principle. They possibly share the same ideology. That means in this region, many countries said that you can invade non-Western countries. That's okay. You can occupy non-Western countries' territory, or you make it more strictly. You can occupy the country's territory whose leaders are not elected through our democratic system. So that's why when the Senior Bush launched the war against Iraq, and some European countries sent troops there. So from my understanding, now the UN has the principle for protect every country's territorial sovereignty. But then for weak states, their territorial sovereignty always undermined. Just now we talk about the situation in Yugoslavia. Actually, at that time, if the European leaders said, okay, we support democracy and protect human rights, everything, but no matter what happened, no one allowed to change the border of Yugoslavia. Because the Yugoslavia territorial sovereignty should be respected by everyone. Actually, most of the European countries do not want to respect that principle. They said, okay, split Yugoslavia is okay, because we don't like them. So the question is not, and in this region, people have the same principles. People just said, if you're my friend, you can do whatever you like. If you're not my friend, you can't do all of the things we done.
I won't get into that. Over there, please, and then the last two questions. If we can take them together, please. 3 questions, but be brief, please, because we're in our last 5 minutes.
Excuse me, you were mentioning about Russia confiscating land from Ukraine, but there was more recent that Israel was confiscating land of Syria. But I wonder why this is not mentioned. This is more recent even.
Okay. Behind over there, yeah. Yes. And do introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. This is Daniela Caratas. I'm a physicist. I'm with the IAEA. I'm relieved when I hear your stance regarding the nuclear component in all this global situation. I am a bit confused because you mentioned in many situations my view, and in other situations you mentioned China. China is a very big country, and I assume there are different opinions there. You are definitely a leader of opinion, and we are very pleased that you come with very moderate views, very much close to the West European values that we all share. Would you kindly please detail a bit what percentage could your view be in the general situation and the general complex image of China? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Good, very good question.
Then final question, sorry, right here, and then final words to you, Professor.
Thank you so much. My name is Oliver. I run a new think tank here in Vienna called Global Neighbors. I'm very happy to see Professor Yen again. Question for both panelists, also to Niccolo. Given the increased discourse on strategic autonomy in Europe, while at the same time an increased hesitance to really fully align again with the US, it's currently pretty impossible, but also fully aligned to China, how do you assess the prospect of a balanced, non-confrontational EU-China relationships in the future that is really future-oriented, including climate change, but also other probably a bit more controversial issues? Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Please.
Well, I really want to go to that lady's question, how much my views represent the Chinese. I think I should be very frank with you. I'm a minority in China. And most people don't agree with me. And so there's a misunderstanding. Suppose I'm an opinion leader in China, actually now. And I'm always attacked by others. I'm always serve as a target rather than the driving force. And in China, you're absolutely right. This country, the opinions are quite pluralistic and many, many different views. So that's why in my book, I always said that moral realism is not Chinese theory. It's a universal theory because it's not explain Chinese behavior only. It explains every country's behavior. And so that's why some people doesn't like my opinion. They said, you're a Chinese scholar, your theory based on ancient Chinese thought, so it should be affiliated with Chinese school. And actually my view is that there's no Chinese school. And if Confucius, you don't know Confucianism. Confucius is so well known in the last 2,000 years as the #1 Chinese scholar. He cannot represent Chinese, right? Because Lao Tzu do not agree with him. Lao Tzu is also very famous, very known. So here I will say I'm minority. I do not represent the opinion. Second, I will say I like that lady's question very much. I think the issue in Gaza even worse than the war in Ukraine. At least in Ukraine, both sides constrain themselves from attacking civilian facilities and people. They do. They hurt the civilians and bomb some, destroyed some civilian facilities. But not mainly targeted on the civilians. In Gaza, it's totally different. The Israeli government, not the Israeli government, I should say Netanyahu's government, and if the others serve as leader as the Israeli government, may not do the same. I think there are some rational Israeli politicians. If these rational Israeli politicians hold the power, I think they will adopt different approaches to dealing with the problem in Gaza. But because of Netanyahu, and because of his personal preference, and he do not care purposely to attack the civilians, women, and the children. And so some of his cabinet members even said that even their infant, they will grow into a terrorist. So this is really, I think that's too much. And although I'm not a liberalist, I'm realist, I cannot agree with this. If we watch all of these Hollywood movies, whenever they have this, the criminals robbing the bank, they hold the customers and the bank staff as human shield before them. What's the principle for police? They cannot say that for the sake of killing the criminal, so I kill the people and the bank staff, customers first. So how about the Netanyahu's government? They publicly legitimized their policy killing women and children, said that because terrorists hide behind them, so we have to kill these innocent people first, and then for the purpose of killing. So I think this is not only violent, the norms of the sovereignty, it's much more than that. It's violent to the human rights norms. Actually, the war of law established in 1925, 100 years. So I think this is a very serious political indicator of the current trend of counter-globalization. So this is a very typical case. And the last question about the China-EU relationship, I have confidence in this issue. And personally, and I doubt, and EU will have the chance to reach a desirable agreement with the Trump administration on the tariff. Although Trump postponed this policy, the tariff for 90 days, EU are waiting for that. But it doesn't mean that by the day, the last day come, they can reach an agreement. I doubt. Trump possibly said, okay, forget it, no more. I changed my policy, no more tariff on EU, no more tariff on other countries. He possibly do that. He abandoned the tariff policy. Do you think Europe can trust him? Even he abandoned the policy. Do the European policymakers can trust him? He said, you can abandon the policy today. You can pick it up tomorrow, right? No one knows. So I think the uncertainty of this type of leadership will make Europeans hesitate. Not for the White House hesitate to reach an agreement with Europe. I think it's not that difficult for White House to reach agreement with Brussels. The reason is that anyhow, they do not prepare to implement this agreement. No matter what agreement, treaty they sign, they say, okay, that's a piece of paper. So I doubt the European leaders will trust any agreement they signed with the White House. Meanwhile, because of this kind of suspicion, and they have to consider long-term relationship with China. Even they survived the relationship with Trump. And then the European leaders will ask the question, can you guarantee that there's no such kind of leaders after Trump in the US? Now, when Biden hold the White House, people say, hey, Trump is unique. It's an accident. It's not the trend. But if the accident, how can he win the second time? When things happen second time, it's not by chance. And there must be something behind it. So from my understanding, not only European leaders, all of the leaders, including Japanese leaders, they will ask the question to themselves, can we have a durable, stable relationship with the US? Since every 4 years, US will have new leaders. After the Cold War, and all American allies and believe, no matter who served as president in the United States, they can never shake the relationship with the allies. That's the base of our relationship. So people trust in that. I doubt. Nowadays, our American allies still have a strong belief in this opinion.
So, thank you very much, Professor, for enlightening us in so many different ways, both at a theoretical and practical level of views on the global order, the relations between US, China, and Europe. I'd like to thank Niccolò and the Berggruen Foundation for making this possible, and thank you all for coming. But please join me in thanking Professor Xuetong for his presentation.